3,000 years of peace have ended. Humanity just smiled. The human gauge hit the deck with a flat metallic slap. Caver looked down at it. The thing was barely longer than his hand. A rectangular plate of dull steel, its edges scarred from years of use, with a row of precisely cut slots running from one side to the other. No jewels, no embedded processor, no status markings, no manufacturer's crest. Just metal. A Narathi boarding trooper nudged it with his boot. This is what they measure military hardware with. Fleet Regent Drex Ilmer laughed. The sound rolled through the captured logistics station's central bay, where human workers stood under guard beside silent cargo loaders. Apparently, Caver did not laugh. He crouched. Each slot had a tiny number stamped beside it. Several corners were polished bright, where countless objects had been pressed against them. A tool designed to answer simple questions. Too wide, too narrow, correct, incorrect. That was all. For a civilization that had possessed interstellar travel for thousands of years, it looked embarrassingly primitive. Caver straightened as one of the station displays flickered. A human woman appeared. Short dark hair, gray work jacket, no military decorations. Hannah Brick, Inter-Service Standards Chief. Caver had read her file before the operation. He had expected an elderly bureaucrat or an industrial accountant. Breck was neither. She looked like someone who had spent more time inside fabrication halls than conference chambers. Behind her, workers were moving quickly through another station. Not running, not panicking, moving. Drex stepped toward the camera. Chief Breck. She looked at him. Fleet Regent, your station is now under Narathi control. I can see that. Drex smiled. The Directorate had waited 3,000 years for this morning. 3,000 years of border agreements, inspection protocols, territorial conferences, ceremonial handshakes, and increasingly tedious declarations that open war between major powers had become obsolete. The galaxy had built monuments to the peace. Entire species had been born, expanded across star systems, and grown old without seeing a battle between sovereign powers. The Narathi Directorate had grown powerful during that peace. Powerful enough, Drex believed, to end it. His ships had crossed human-controlled boundaries 6 hours earlier. 11 human logistics stations had been seized. 3 patrol groups had been crippled. 2 mining corridors were already under Narathi occupation. The operation had unfolded almost exactly as predicted. Caver had spent 16 years preparing the supply model that made it possible. Drex leaned closer to the display. Your government has received our declaration. Hannah nodded. A tone sounded through the station. Every human worker stopped. The announcement came in 6 languages. The final treaty channel between humanity and the Narathi Directorate had closed. 3,000 years of peace had ended. One of the human prisoners whispered something Caver's translator did not catch. Another closed his eyes. Hannah Brick looked past Drex, at the armed boarding troops, at the captured cargo bay, at the steel gauge lying on the deck, and smiled. It was not a broad smile. It lasted less than a second, but Caver saw it. So did Drex. The Fleet Regent's expression hardened. You find this amusing? No. Then why are you smiling? Hannah's face settled. I just understood something. Drex waited. She did not explain. Instead, she addressed the human workers. Station personnel comply with lawful prisoner procedures, preserve life, destroy nothing unnecessarily. Drex gave a small laugh. You have lost 11 logistics nodes. I heard. We have already demonstrated the failure of your defensive model. Hannah looked almost tired. Have you? The transmission ended. Drex stared at the blank display. Then he turned toward the gauge on the floor. Cheap civilization. He kicked it away. Caver watched the plate slide beneath a cargo rack. He would remember that sound later. Not because it was loud, because it fit so perfectly into the silence that followed. The first week of the war belonged to the Narathi. Caver had no doubt about that. The numbers were excellent. Humanity abandoned 2 exposed depots rather than defend them. A Narathi strike group destroyed 3 human patrol vessels near Caro Belt. Another forced a human cruiser squadron away from the Velith shipping lanes. No human counterattack penetrated Directorate territory. No hidden fleet appeared. No impossible weapon changed the battlefield. The humans seemed exactly as their military assessments had suggested. Capable, disciplined, numerous, but not extraordinary. Drex made sure the galaxy understood. His victory address was transmitted from the bridge of the flagship Crown of Oaths, with the captured human station visible behind him. For 3,000 years, he declared, civilizations mistook peace for permanence. The Narathi Directorate has demonstrated that strength still decides history. Kavar watched from the rear of the bridge. He did not object to the statement. He objected to the readiness table floating above his wrist terminal. He refreshed it, then refreshed it again. The result did not change. Provisioner. Kavar looked up. Junior Logistics Officer Sental was waiting beside him. Yes, we have revised Group 7's return to service estimate. Kavar looked at the highlighted vessels. 23 ships. Only 4 had suffered significant combat damage. Why? Component delays. Which components? Sental hesitated. Different ones. Kavar expanded the list. A thermal regulation collar, 2 fire control alignment blocks, a thrust vector sensor assembly, a coolant pressure sequencer, a portside shield phase conditioner, a targeting array actuator. None of them were major systems. None should have mattered. Transfer replacements from reserve hulls. We tried. Kavar looked up. Sental lowered his voice. The Varrock pattern sequencer does not fit the newer Kelesh pattern feed manifold. Then use the Kelesh reserve. They use a revised mounting geometry. Kavar stared at him. How revised? 4 millimeters. Kavar looked back at the list. 4 millimeters. The ship carrying that sequencer was 700 meters long. It had weapons capable of burning through a fortified asteroid. It could survive a direct kinetic strike that would turn a civilian freighter into vapor. And it was unavailable because of 4 millimeters. Fabricate an adapter. The manufacturer prohibits field adapters on pressure systems. Override them. We need a certified design. Request 1. We did. How long? 32 hours. Kavar looked toward Drex. The fleet regent was receiving congratulations from 2 admirals. 32 hours was not a crisis. Not yet. Approved. Flag every similar delay. Sental bowed his head. Yes, Provisioner. Kavar returned to the readiness table. On another column sat the human estimates. Humanity had lost more hulls than the Narathi. Yet something bothered him. Their surviving ships kept coming back. A cruiser damaged near Caro Belt had reappeared 2 days later in another system. A human escort with half its portside armor burned away had returned to convoy duty after 19 hours. 3 frigates listed as disabled were suddenly operational again. Kavar opened the intelligence reports. The human ships were not repaired completely. That was obvious from the imagery. They returned scarred, patched, sometimes with armor panels that did not match. One frigate had a civilian thermal exchanger bolted across its damaged aft section. Kavar enlarged the image. It looked ridiculous. Then he noticed the ship was moving at full combat acceleration. He remembered the steel gauge. He closed the image. 3 days later, Kavar boarded the Narathi cruiser Eternal Spear. The vessel had not been destroyed. It had barely been damaged. That made the visit worse. The Eternal Spear had destroyed 2 human escorts during the first engagement of the war. Its captain had earned a commendation. Now it floated beside a repair tender. Silent. Combat unavailable. The chief technician met Kavar in the weapon's spine. She looked exhausted. Provisioner. Show me. She led him through 2 pressure doors to a control junction beneath the forward batteries. A panel had been removed. Inside, a compact black assembly sat between thick conduits. The technician pointed at a cracked housing. Recall phase interpreter. Kavar frowned. That disables the battery. The battery itself is functional. Then bypass it. The interpreter prevents resonance drift between the firing chamber and the stabilization grid. How long to replace? We have replacements. Kavar stared at her. She opened a storage case. Inside were 6 nearly identical black assemblies. He crouched. Then why am I here? She picked up the first. Generation 12. She held it beside the damaged component. The connector pins were wider. Generation 13. Different lock ring. Generation 14. The coolant feed sat on the opposite side. Generation 15. Correct connectors. Wrong firmware handshake. Caver's throat tightened. The ship is Generation 15. The hull is. She gave him a bitter look. The forward battery was refitted during the previous modernization cycle, using a late Generation 14 stabilization package with 15 series control logic. Caver stared at the 6 replacements. All expensive, all sophisticated, all useless. Can you modify one? Yes. How long? 40 hours, if the machine shop accepts the risk. Caver stood. Beside him, a young technician had been listening. She suddenly said, "My grandfather worked on this ship." The chief technician turned sharply. The young Narathi lowered her eyes. He said the old engineers used to brag that no 2 Spear-class cruisers were truly the same. Caver looked around the compartment. Hand-fitted conduits, custom housings, manufacturer plates, generations of improvements layered over one another. He had admired ships like this his entire life. Each one was a masterpiece. Now the word sounded different. A masterpiece could not lend its parts to another masterpiece. The Narathi captured Harrow Junction on the 12th day. Drex called it the turning point. Humanity called it a warehouse. Caver arrived 6 hours after the fighting ended. The station had been abandoned in good order. The humans had evacuated most personnel, but left thousands of tons of material behind. Drex walked beside him through storage galleries. "Now," the fleet regent said, "we find what keeps their fleet alive." Caver expected military stock, dedicated reactor regulators, encrypted fire control assemblies, specialized shield elements, weapons-grade guidance systems. Instead, the first storage gallery contained mining equipment. The second contained agricultural actuators. The third contained structural fasteners, power connectors, coolant lines, and industrial processors. Drex stopped beside a pallet. "What is this?" A Narathi analyst checked the label. "Atmospheric pump controller. For warships." "No, Regent." "Then why is it in a military logistics station?" This was not technically a military station. Drex looked around. Human warships refueled here. So did ore haulers. Caver moved farther into the gallery. He saw a familiar shape hanging from a workbench. A rectangular steel plate. Slotted. Scarred. He walked toward it. A captured human technician sat nearby under guard. Caver pointed at the plate. "What is that called?" The man glanced at it. "Fit gauge." "For what?" "Whatever needs checking." That is not an answer. The human shrugged. "Bolts, couplers, brackets, feed locks, field housing. Depends which gauge." Caver took it from the hook. "This design is used elsewhere." "Of course." "Why?" The human looked confused by the question. "So things fit." Drex had followed him. He laughed. Caver did not. He placed the gauge back on the bench. "Show us your military inventory." The human technician scratched his jaw. "You're standing in it." Drex's expression changed. "These are civilian components." "Some." "Mining hardware." "Yes." "Agricultural controls." "Also yes." Drex stepped closer. "Do you take us for fools?" The human shook his head. Caver spoke quietly. "How much of this can be used by your fleet?" The technician glanced at him. "Directly depends. Indirectly, most of it." Drex scoffed. "Explain." The human gestured toward a compact gray processor on the nearest pallet. "That controller can't run a destroyer's targeting system. Wrong certification, wrong shielding. Then it is useless." "No, its chassis standard matches 3 military processor families. Same mount pattern, same power bus, same coolant interface. Strip the civilian boards, install hardened internals, certify it, and you have a serviceable housing." Caver looked at another crate. "And those?" "Mining actuators. Military use. Dock clamps, armor positioning rigs, emergency thrust vector mounts if you're desperate." Drex smiled thinly. "Desperate indeed." The technician ignored him. Caver pointed toward a line of thermal regulators. "Those? Mostly agricultural. Mostly, same base interface as the secondary environmental loops on a lot of older naval hulls. Caver felt something cold move through him. He turned. The storage gallery suddenly looked different, not because the objects had changed, because the categories had. Mining, agriculture, transport, military. The Narathi built separate systems for separate purposes. The humans had built boundaries that could be crossed. An alarm sounded deeper inside the station. A human fabrication line had restarted automatically after a power interruption. Caver followed the noise. A machine arm moved across a work surface, cutting material from a rectangular blank. A Narathi engineer checked the control panel. It is running a queued job. What job? The engineer looked at the readout. Military certification sample. Caver stepped closer. The machine cut, drilled, turned, measured. A finished assembly slid onto the output table. The human technician nodded toward it. Field control housing. Caver picked it up. Warm metal pressed into his palms. This machine makes mining components. Yesterday, Caver looked at him. The man nodded toward the gauge hanging on the wall. Today it makes that. Caver did not answer. Drex did. One component. The human looked at him. Yes. One ordinary component. Yes. Drex spread his hands. You see, Provisioner, they are reduced to improvising with civilian factories. Caver looked at the warm housing, then at the endless rows of ordinary crates. He finally understood why the human technician was not embarrassed. There was no secret stockpile. That was the secret. Humanity did not need an entirely separate industrial civilization hiding behind its military one. Caver turned toward Drex. Regent. Drex was already walking away. We have seen enough. Caver remained beside the machine. The human technician watched him. You're the supply officer, aren't you? Caver's eyes narrowed. How did you know? You're the only one who stopped laughing. The report took Caver 9 hours to complete. Drex read 3 pages, then closed it. This is defeatism. It is arithmetic. Humans have lost 17% more combat hulls than we have. Yes, then we are winning. By hull count. What other count matters? Caver projected the readiness chart. Narathi operational strength had fallen every day. Not dramatically. That was why no one had panicked. 3%. Then 5. Then 8. Ships waited for parts. Parts waited for transport. Transport waited for routing clearance. Repair teams waited for manufacturer instructions. Manufacturer specialists were spread across hundreds of ships and could not be everywhere. Meanwhile, human availability moved differently. They suffered sharp drops after battles, then recovered. Not completely, but quickly. Drex stared at the graph. They repair damaged ships. Yes, as do we. Not at the same rate, because their vessels are crude. Caver hesitated. Possibly. Drex looked triumphant. Then Caver continued. That may be an advantage. The fleet regent's face went still. Caver selected 2 warships. Our cruiser Eternal Spear requires a specialized recoil phase interpreter. 6 similar components exist within the task force. None are compatible. He switched to a human cruiser. This vessel suffered damage to a secondary power conditioning assembly. Intelligence indicates the replacement was sourced from an ore processing complex. That proves exactly what I said, crude. It returned to battle in 14 hours. Drex rose. A Narathi warship is not a mining vessel. No. Our systems are optimized. Yes. Our weapons deliver 12% greater output per reactor mass than comparable human weapons. Yes. Our drives maintain better efficiency at sustained combat velocity. Yes. Our shield architecture remains superior. Yes. Drex leaned over the table, then stopped trying to convince me that inferior machines are superior. Caver met his eyes. I am trying to convince you that war does not ask whether the perfect machine is superior. Drex said nothing. Caver pointed toward the readiness graph. It asks what you have after the perfect machine breaks. The fleet regent dismissed him from the room. Aster Vale Foundry died on the 19th day. Caver watched it happen through Narathi targeting telemetry. The facility orbited a cold, blue-white star on the human side of the Darren Reach. Its production output was significant but not exceptional. The intelligence summary described it as one of humanity's oldest continuously operating orbital foundries. Drex chose it because humanity had begun routing increasing repair work through the region. The attack was precise. 6 Narathi strike cruisers jumped into the system. Human defenses responded. The Narathi lost 1 ship. Another suffered drive damage. Aster Vale lost its primary cooling spine. Caver knew the station was doomed before the humans announced evacuation failure. Sections of the orbital ring glowed orange, then white. Internal explosions traveled around its circumference. The station broke. Millions of tons of machinery scattered into the darkness. Drex stood beside Caver. There, the fleet regent's voice was almost gentle. No factory, no compatibility. Caver studied the human network map. Production estimates dropped. Repair projections lengthened. For the first time in days, the human recovery curve bent downward. Drex smiled. Everything has a limit. Caver nodded. Yes. He hoped the fleet regent would stop there. Instead, Drex ordered another strike. Then another. Hours later, Caver received an intercepted human coordination channel. Hannah Breck appeared on the screen. Her face was lit by fabrication displays. No smile now. Someone off camera gave her the casualty update from Aster Vale. Hannah closed her eyes. Confirmed. Yes. How many evacuated? The answer was muted by interference. Whatever number she heard changed her face. Only slightly. She looked down. Caver remembered the opening day. Her smile. For the first time he understood that it had never meant she believed humans could not be hurt. Hannah reached toward a production map. One of the nodes was labeled Aster Vale. She touched it. The symbol went dark. Move its certified families to Kestrel, Rook, and Fallow. A human officer answered. Fallow is already at 112%. Then give them what Vale was making that nobody else can. A pause. That list is short. Hannah looked at the blank place on the map. I know. Caver froze the recording. Replayed it. That list is short. He opened every known Aster Vale production file. The station had manufactured thousands of parts. Only a fraction had been unique. The rest could be reassigned. Aster Vale mattered. People had died. Production had been lost. But the network had not lost the ability to make most of what Aster Vale made. Caver stared at the dead symbol on the human map. The humans had designed grief into their systems. Not the emotion. The assumption. Something would disappear. A factory, a shipyard, a supplier, a route, a world. They had built as if loss was normal. Narathi engineering had been built during peace. Human engineering had been built by people who never quite trusted permanence. By the 4th week, Narathi superiority still existed on paper. The Directorate possessed more heavy cruisers, more dreadnoughts, more high-output siege batteries. Yet Caver's readiness table had become a field of warnings. A fleet could contain thousands of ships and still become smaller every hour. Drex finally accepted that something had changed. He did not accept Caver's conclusion. We end this before their industrial mobilization expands. Caver studied the proposed attack. Target Fallow Dock. Human anchorage. Repair complex. Civilian industrial nexus. Large enough to support damaged military formations. Caver's pulse quickened. Regent, Fallow is exactly where their compatibility advantage will be strongest. That is why we destroy it. We would be attacking their strongest repair environment, while our own readiness is declining. And if we wait? Caver did not answer. Drex answered for him. We decline further. Yes. Then this is our final favorable window. That was true. Caver hated him for being right. Drex expanded the plan. The largest remaining Narathi combat groups would converge on Fallow. Humanity would either defend it or surrender its central repair corridor. If the humans concentrated their fleet, the Narathi would use superior firepower to break them. If they abandoned Fallow, the war would lose one of its most flexible support anchors. It was a good plan, perhaps the best plan left. Caver looked at Drex. You intend to spend our remaining operational advantage. I intend to convert it into victory. And if it fails, Drex's gaze hardened. Then we will discuss failure after it happens. Fallow Dock was ugly. Caver had expected a fortress. Instead, the first images showed an industrial sprawl surrounding a gray dwarf planet. Repair gantries, storage rings, ore processors, civilian habitats, construction yards, docking lattices. No grand symmetry, no monumental military architecture. Human warships shared anchorage lanes with freight haulers. A damaged destroyer sat beside an ice mining carrier. Tugs dragged armor panels past agricultural transports. It looks unfinished, a Narathi admiral said. Caver knew better now. It looked changeable. The Narathi fleet entered the system in 6 attack formations. Human ships withdrew toward the dock. Drex smiled. They are retreating. Caver watched the tactical board. Toward support. Exactly. They have tied themselves to the target. The first Narathi volley crossed the system. Human screens lit. 2 frigates vanished. A cruiser spun out of formation. Fallow Dock lost an outer gantry. The humans returned fire. Narathi shields absorbed most of it. The Directorate advanced. For 23 minutes, Drex appeared correct. The human battle line gave ground. The Narathi heavy ships pushed forward. A human destroyer broke away trailing atmosphere. Caver marked it disabled. 6 minutes later, it entered Fallow Dock. A civilian tug locked onto its stern. Another tug attached to the damaged side. A modular service bridge extended. Caver watched live repair data from intercepted channels. Port power bus isolated. Structural frame 7 stable. Secondary thermal loop. Gone. Replacement. Pole Green Family C. That's industrial. Certified to pressure class. Yes. Use it. The destroyer disappeared behind a gantry. Caver shifted to another channel. A human cruiser arrived with damaged maneuvering thrusters. The required actuator module was unavailable. A nearby excavation vessel had 3 compatible units. One was removed, transferred, recertified, installed. The cruiser returned to combat 51 minutes later. Not perfect, not fully repaired, operational. Caver watched another human ship rotate out. Then another returned. Not the same strength, not the same configuration, but enough. Narathi ships did not rotate so easily. A battleship suffered a shield coolant fault. It withdrew. No compatible pump assembly existed within its formation. A cruiser lost 2 fire control regulators. It remained in battle, but could use only half its batteries. A carrier suffered damage to a launch synchronization module. Replacement scheduled. 96 minutes. Caver's display filled with yellow. Then orange. Drex kept attacking. Push Group 3 forward. Group 3 reports 14 vessels below preferred combat readiness. Preferred is not required. Understood. The ships advanced. The second major Narathi volley struck Fallow. A repair ring shattered. Hundreds died. A human-heavy cruiser exploded near the eastern gantries. Caver flinched. The humans were not winning easily. That mattered. If their system had been magic, Drex would have been right to call it a trick. Instead, humanity was paying for every hour. The difference was that damage accumulated differently. Human damage spread into a network built to absorb it. Narathi damage concentrated inside unique machines. At the center of Fallow Dock, Hannah Breck stood in a control chamber as the station trembled around her. Caver caught her on an intercepted tactical feed. A worker pushed a component against a slotted steel gauge. The deck shook. Dust dropped from overhead. The worker checked one slot, then another, then handed the component away. Routine. Under fire. Caver stared. The gauge. The same ugly little piece of steel. He suddenly understood what had made Hannah smile on the first day. Not their fleet. Not their weapons. Not some secret calculation of inevitable victory. She had looked at Narathi soldiers carrying proprietary rifles, proprietary armor couplers, proprietary power cells, proprietary field systems. Then at a human gauge designed around a civilization, obsessed with common dimensions. She had understood the type of enemy standing in front of her. Drex had declared a war of attrition, using a military culture that treated substitution as compromise. Humanity had entered it with a civilization built around the belief that something else should fit. Caver, he turned. Drex was watching him. Readiness. Caver opened the projection. He almost wished he had not. The fleet regent's voice lowered. How many can sustain another full attack sequence? Caver calculated. 62%. Silence. Drex looked toward the battle. And afterward, Caver did not want to answer. Depending on damage distribution, between 38 and 46%. The Narathi bridge went quiet. An admiral said, "Regent." Drex raised a hand. Ahead, Fallow Dock burned. Human formations were thin. Several defensive groups had withdrawn completely. This was the moment. Caver knew what Drex saw. One more strike might break the dock, might break the humans, might justify everything. Prepare full concentration. Caver stepped forward. Regent. Drex did not look at him. Our models show the fleet cannot sustain prolonged action after another maximum sequence. I am aware. If Fallow survives, it will not. Caver looked around the bridge. No one moved. Drex gave the order. All batteries. The Narathi fleet charged. For a moment, Caver saw the Directorate at its greatest. Dreadnoughts aligned. Siege cruisers opened their weapon spines. Carriers launched attack craft. Thousands of systems synchronized across a formation built by 3,000 years of technological refinement. It was beautiful. That was the tragedy. The volley struck. Fallow Dock disappeared behind fire. Human shields collapsed across 2 sectors. A manufacturing ring broke loose and tumbled into the planet's upper atmosphere. 3 human warships vanished. The central anchorage went dark. Drex gripped the command rail. Again. Nobody answered. He turned. Again. The weapons officer swallowed. Regent Group 2 cannot synchronize. Then local fire. Group 4 reports thermal restrictions. Override. Group 6 has lost targeting coherence across 27% of heavy batteries. Use visual fallback. Carrier screens are requesting recovery priority. Drex looked at Caver. Caver did not need the readiness table. He opened it anyway. The tactical display showed hundreds of Narathi ships. Most still existed. Most still had crews. Most still possessed working engines. Many still possessed working weapons. But the green icons were disappearing. Yellow, orange, red, waiting for parts, waiting for cooling, waiting for certified technicians, waiting for components from ships built by different yards, different dynasties, different manufacturers, different generations. The fleet had not been destroyed. That was what made the sight unbearable. It had become unavailable. Across the battlefield, lights returned inside Fallow Dock. One sector, then another. A tug pushed a wrecked frigate out of a repair lane. A damaged human cruiser took its place. Industrial arms moved. Service bridges extended. Civilian fabrication lines continued running. The humans had fewer ships than they had at the start of the battle. Far fewer, but their remaining strength was still moving. Drex stared. What can we still attack with? Caver looked at the figures. Not enough. That is not a number. Then here is one. Caver met his eyes. Less than they can still repair. No one spoke. The fleet regent slowly released the command rail. Fallow Dock had survived. The war had not ended in a spectacular explosion. It had ended inside a readiness column. Human pursuit groups formed 2 hours later. Caver watched them gather beyond sensor range. The Narathi fleet could retreat, but only if humanity allowed it. Some Narathi ships had drives damaged enough to make escape uncertain. Others could travel but not fight. Drex remained in command. Technically, his voice had lost its certainty. Prepare defensive withdrawal. The communications officer interrupted. Human transmission. Drex looked up. Hannah Breck appeared. There was dried blood on the side of her face. The control room behind her was half dark. No smile. Fleet Regent. Drex's jaw tightened. Chief Breck, Human Command is offering a 6-hour ceasefire corridor for damaged ships and medical transfer. Drex stared. Caver saw the insult strike him. You expect surrender? No. You have the advantage. Yes. And you are allowing us to withdraw. We're allowing ships that stop firing to leave the combat zone. Why? Hana looked at him for several seconds. Because we already know what happens if this continues. Drex almost laughed. You expect gratitude? No. Then what do you expect? Compliance. Caver looked away to hide his reaction. Drex's hands tightened, then slowly relaxed. What are your terms? Immediate cessation of offensive operations, return of prisoners, withdrawal from occupied human stations. Formal ceasefire negotiations begin within 48 hours. And if I refuse? Hana's expression did not change. We keep fighting. There was no threat in the words. That frightened Caver more than one would have. Drex looked at the readiness board, then at the human woman. 6 hours. Yes. He closed his eyes. Accepted. The channel ended. No human victory broadcast followed. No pursuit fleet opened fire. Across the system, weapons cooled. Medical craft moved first. The Directorate removed Drex Ilmer from Strategic Command 9 days later. Caver attended the review. The ruling council did not accuse Drex of cowardice. He had not been cowardly. They did not accuse him of incompetence. His opening plan had been devastatingly effective. They accused him of continuing the fallow assault after his own logistics staff had demonstrated that the fleet could not sustain the operation if the first strike failed. Drex listened in silence. When the ruling was issued, he looked once at Caver. There was no hatred in his face, only exhaustion. Perhaps that was worse. History would remember him as the commander who ended 3,000 years of peace. Caver suspected historians would eventually add another sentence. He had built a war around the assumption that the finest machine would always have the part it needed. The ceasefire held. Peace did not return immediately. That would have been too easy. Border systems remained tense. Humanity recovered prisoners. Narathi forces evacuated captured stations. Families buried their dead. Aster Vale remained a spreading field of metal around a cold star. Fallow Dock kept repairing ships for months. Caver returned home. For the first time in his career, he did not go to fleet headquarters. He went to a manufacturing bay. The building had once produced propulsion control for only one class of Narathi frigate. Its walls were lined with honors. Generations of engineers had been proud of that specialization. Now most of the old production cells were dark. A young technician waited beside a workbench. On the bench lay a rectangular steel plate, slotted, unadorned. Caver picked it up. Narathi steel this time. Human dimensions. Adapted. Not copied exactly. The Directorate had spent weeks arguing over that distinction. The technician held out a new power conditioning assembly. We changed the mounting family. Caver examined it. Which ship? 3 frigate classes. He looked at her. She smiled nervously. And 2 civilian tug families. Once their certification is complete. Caver pressed one edge of the component against the first slot. It passed. Second. Passed. Third. Passed. The final slot was tight. He adjusted the angle. The component slid through. Perfectly. Neither of them spoke. Outside the bay, a damaged Narathi frigate waited. The technician carried the component to it. A service crew removed an older proprietary assembly. They installed the new one. No machining. No adapter. No manufacturer representative. The locking arms closed. The frigate's power system came alive. Caver remained at the workbench. He looked down. The plain steel gauge lay flat beside the empty space where the component had been.